Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with the guest pilot today. Our guest pilot is Scavenger, who is going to show us how to use one of the most interesting features of the Mirage 2000C, the INS Precision Bombing Mode. He's going to show us exactly how to set things up in the cockpit, as well as how to use the HUD and the HUD symbology, which has some nuances that you'll want to be aware of. Before we let him do that, though, let's take a quick look at the idea behind INS Precision Bombing Mode. INS Precision Bombing Mode is basically a way of dropping bombs on a target you can't see. You could, of course, use this as a high-level bombing mode to deliver bombs when you can't actually see the target, for instance, because of weather, and I'm sure that it was built with that functionality at least partly in mind. More often, though, it's likely to be used tactically to toss or loft bombs, most often at low level, and that's what Scavenger is going to show us today. In a low-level toss or loft bombing mode, the idea is that knowing where your target is, you can approach it at low level, pull up sharply ahead of the target, releasing the bombs as you pull up and thereby tossing them into the air. Now, especially with low-drag, US Mark 80 series bombs, which are pretty aerodynamic, you can actually get a fair distance out of them if you do this right. The point being that you should be able to release the bombs well short of the target and egress before you get into range of enemy point air defenses around the target. The idea of toss bombing has been around for a while, certainly since the early 1970s. The Israeli Air Force made extensive use of it during the Yom Kippur War. It is actually possible to use toss bombing even without any kind of bombing computer. I actually tried it a while back in an A4 without using the bomb computer and just using the navigation computer. And while it can work, I would say that if you're going to do manual toss bombing, you have to be at least as lucky as you are good. And no matter what you do, your standoff is going to be a couple of thousand meters at most, so it's not really going to be very long. But even in that case, it's enough to mean that you don't have to overfly the target, and that's going to have some significant survivability benefits. So by the time of the Falklands War, it seems that toss bombing was a pretty well-established approach to attacking certain kinds of targets, since the RAF Harriers used it as their default mode when they attacked the Stanley airfield. Even then, though, they didn't really have the tools to achieve significant precision, and it's fair to say their results were mixed. Mixed enough that they really didn't do it that often. So, to some extent, I do have to wonder if the UK experience in the Falklands informed the development of the Mirage 2000C and resulted in the inclusion of precision bombing INS mode. The timing's about right, I think. I have no proof that happened, but it is interesting. So, the Stanley Airport, I think, is an example of the kind of target for which toss bombing was the method of choice. And that's because in order for toss bombing to work, a few things really have to be true. First of all, you have to know where your target is, pretty much before you take off. So a fixed installation is obviously ideal. Second, the target needs to be large enough not to require a highly precise delivery. No matter what you do with toss bombing, you're not going to hit small point targets reliably, like individual vehicles or bunkers. But buildings or groups of buildings or even large vehicle concentrations are certainly viable targets. Third, you have to be able to make a straight, fast, low-level approach to the target from far enough away that you can get aligned on the target and then perform the toss, which requires you to pull up sharply. This approach needs to be safe, meaning that you expect the air defenses to be concentrated around the target area, which you will avoid, and not along the approach path where you will be vulnerable, which again is why something like an airfield would be an ideal target. So let's take a quick look at how precision INS bombing works, and then we'll let Scavenger show us how to actually set up the jet. The basic idea is that we identify a target and our axis of approach. Along this axis, we look for an initial point that's at least 5 nautical miles from the target. If we can, we want to use an easily identifiable object on the ground, because this will allow us to do a final check and calibration of our inertial nav system at the initial point. We need to plan our flight such that we approach the IP on our attack vector, because once we fly over the IP, we'll need to fly very precisely towards the target. At the appropriate time, we'll get a cue to begin the pull-up, we'll hold the trigger and pull up, and the computer will release the bombs. Our accuracy will be determined obviously by the accuracy of the INS, since it's doing all of this purely by prediction, but it will also be critically dependent on our ability to fly straight at the target from a significant distance away and to maintain that direction as we pull up. Remember, the bombs are not guided. We really are tossing them just a long ways. And just like throwing anything over a long distance, if we're a little bit off when we throw, the bombs will be a long way off when they land. Okay, that's the theory. Let's watch Scavenger put it into practice. Okay, Scavenger's mission for today is to attack the half-track that is at the center of the big circular target. If you're familiar with the iron bombing test range, the one that we always use, the main target. So his target is the very center of that target, and he has been asked to attack it using INS Precision Bombing, and he is going to set up the jet in real time to do that. So let's take a look in the cockpit.
Hi everyone, Scavenger here. So first we're going to open up the F10 map and we're going to look at our target area, which as Psychic has already mentioned is the half track in the centre of the main target ring. And we're going to want to try and find a nice, easily recognisable terrain feature that's a good distance away from here, say about 5 nautical miles or so. And looking down I can see that there is a power line pylon just above the river here, which will be quite easy to spot from far away. So I'm going to grab the coordinates for this pylon and we're going to plug those into our inertial navigation system as a waypoint. And we will navigate ourselves over to that waypoint to where the INS thinks that the pylon is. We will then visually confirm where the pylon actually is, because there will be a discrepancy between the 2 points due to the INS drifting over time. And we'll use this to correct that drift. So looking down at our PCN, we can now put in those coordinates. I'm going to choose waypoint 8 here just because that's the first one that doesn't already have any data in it. And I'm going to be putting in the coordinates in a degrees decimal minutes format, rather than the degrees minutes seconds that's the F10 map defaults to. And the way that you can get the map to show you those coordinates in that format is by pressing Alt-Y a couple of times, and you'll know you've got it right when you've got a decimal point followed by 3 numbers at the end. And also make sure to be putting in the full coordinates, not just the first 5 digits that are displayed on the PCN, and you'll be good to go. We'll also need to put in the altitude of the waypoint, which in this case the pylon was 52 feet above sea level, so it is a positive value, and that converts to 16 meters as you can see on the right. We'll now put in the data for the where the target is, and we're going to be doing that as an offset relative to the waypoint, and we're going to use the rho theta method to do that. Rho is the distance in nautical miles, which in our case is 6.77 miles. And theta is the bearing, which for us is 357 degrees. And then we will put in the altitude difference between the waypoint and the offset, which in this case is a negative value. It is negative 34 feet, because the half track is actually a lower altitude than the pylon is. We'll also set up a route desiree for the waypoint. We'll use the same as the theta, so it'll be a bearing of 357 degrees. And the reason for doing this is it will basically allow the HUD to guide us towards our waypoint so that we're already pointing at the target by the time that we overfly the pylon, so we won't have to move around as much. Now we can set up our weapons on the PCP, so we'll set the fusing to instantaneous and the release quantity to 8 Mark 82s, and we don't need any spacing between them for this. So with that we can release the handbrake and we are ready to taxi.
And with that, Scavenger is off, and you will note that he wastes no time in taxiing either. Now, just before he gets to takeoff here, I did want to give some credit where credit is due. The idea of this video basically came about because of a group over on Yappy Dog's tactical training server. They call themselves the L'Escadron de Whimsy, and they have been busy learning more about the Mirage 2000, including some of its more advanced features. And it was discussion of that gave rise to the idea of doing this video. So If you do want to learn a little bit more about the Mirage 2000, there's the worst place to do that than over on the Tactical Training server and l'Escadron de Whimsy. I think they're always looking for some new members. I will put the link to the Tactical Training server's Discord in the description of the video. And it looks like Scavenger has finished his final checks and is off down the runway. Alright, looks like he's up and away, folks, and I will send it back over to Scavenger to describe getting ready for his first bombing run.
Now that we're successfully up in the air, we're going to start by taking a nice lazy turn to the left, just to give us a bit of spacing, as the waypoint, the pylon, is actually quite close to the end of the runway. I've just put the PCA in RD mode for route désirée, which is gives us the HUD symbology to guide us towards our waypoint at the correct heading of 357 degrees. That won't be helpful right now just because we are currently facing the complete opposite direction to the waypoint, but once we come back around that will be quite useful. And the way that this process is going to work is that as we approach the waypoint, we're going to see a little cross on the heads-up display, which will represent where the INS thinks the power line pylon is. That won't quite be correct, it will be a little bit off, just simply because the INS, due to not being controlled by GPS, loses accuracy over time, it drifts. And so what we're going to need to do is put our heads-up display into air-to-ground mode, which will give us a diamond-shaped designator key. We will then place that over where the pylon actually is and use the AG designate button to correct the INS drift temporarily for the purposes of our strike. So I'm just putting the flight path marker in between those two vertical lines, which is the route désirée symbology. And that will move to get us on the right heading. You can see the cross now is where the INS thinks waypoint 8 should be. And I'm going to select bombs on the PCA and press weapon command forward. It's telling me the radar's off, so I need to make sure that's on. And it's not as low down as it should be, so I need to enter PI mode, which puts it right near the bottom of the HUD. I'm going to roll so that the Q goes over the pylon. There we go. Alright, we have successfully designated. We are now being guided towards the target by the little wings on the sides of our flight path marker. And as soon as a horizontal line appears on the HUD, I'm going to pull up and release the bombs. Bombs away.
And Scavenger's going to follow his bombs in over the target. Now, of course, if he was doing this truly tactically, he would have broken down and away from the target as soon as he's released to make use of that standoff rather than letting it carry him over the target. Looks like some nice hits there. We'll take a look when the target information tracking script comes up. I think I'll be worried less about the accuracy because I can see that from the bomb fall, but I will be interested to see what kind of standoff Scavenger actually got when he launched the bomb. So let's wait and see what we get when the target information tracking script comes up.
With the first attack complete, we are going to come back around, set it for a second one. And so first things first, I'm going to hit weapon command aft, just to clear up the HUD a little bit, so that we're back in nav mode now. And to sort of walk you back through the process, just in case it was a little quick last time, the way that you set all of this up once you're in the air is you make sure first that you have the bombs selected on your PCA. You then are going to want to press weapon command forward to bring up the air-to-ground symbology, so you have that diamond-shaped designation Q. And at this point, if you were doing a normal CCRP release, that's where you'd stop. You'd then put that Q over your target, you'd designate, and then you'd drop your bombs. But to tell the computer that you're wanting to do an INS precision bombing approach, you click the PI button on the PCA, and that will drop the designation queue much closer down to the bottom of your HUD, which makes it easier to designate your waypoint without having to point your nose all the way down at it. You'll then press the AG designate button once you get that queue over the waypoint, over the pylon, and at that point you are then ready to head towards the target. So I'm just rolling out here a little bit too close to the pylon for my liking. Should have given myself a little bit more space. I'm struggling to see where the pylon actually is against that building. I can see the base of it now. It's not the cleanest designation, but we make do. At this point the burner goes on, we hit the deck, and we try and pick up as much speed as we can. The faster you go, the more standoff you get, and then as soon as the release cues appear at the bottom of the screen, which is the horizontal line, we're going to pull up and pull the trigger.
And once again, the bombs are away, and once again, Scavenger's following them into the target area. And speaking of standoff, you may have noticed in the last run that the target information tracking script showed a standoff of 7 kilometers. So this, those are even more accurate bombs than the last ones were. Actually took out the center target, so mission accomplished for the day. Let's just see what the target information tracking script says about the standoff range of this run. And there it is, again, a standoff range of almost 7 kilometers, which is around 3.5 nautical miles. So pretty fair standoff and pretty fair accuracy on that run. I wonder if we can talk Scavenger into giving it one more try.
So we're going to set up for the third and final attack of the day, but we're going to spice things up just a little by showing you a small technique that I sometimes employ, which may or may not be actually helpful, but it is quite fun. And it's about using the Mirage 2000's autopilot to try and avoid any roll that you might induce when you pitch up to deliver the bombs. Because if you roll side to side whilst you're pitching up, you can send the bombs either to the left or to the right of your target, depending on which direction you rolled in. So what we'll do is, once we've designated the pylon and we hit the deck and start burning our way towards the target, we're going to get our wings level, line up on the target, and we're then going to engage the autopilot. And then we will use the trim hat to trim downs, which pitches us up, and that will pitch us up to the point of weapons release without causing us to roll side to side. It's worth bearing in mind that the maximum G's that you can pull in that sort of method seems to be about 3.5, which is quite far away from the maximum of 6 that you can pull when you're in chargé fly-by-wire mode. So you may find that you lose a bit of standoff or that the bombs go a bit short, but like I say, it can improve with the accuracy a little bit. So I'm just going to line myself up on the target here, going to get the wings level, and once I'm content, I will engage the autopilot, and then as soon as I see the release symbology come up on my HUD, I'm going to trim down and release.
Very smooth. Another great run by Scavenger. Just like to say thanks to Scavenger for not only flying the mission, but also contributing his commentary. And here he is again, once again, following his bombs into the target. Let's see how he did using this method. As you can see, it does take a while for the bombs to get there. And once again, right across the middle of the target. So, good results. We'll see what the target information tracking script has to say. So, maybe a little bit shorter standoff range, 6.5 kilometers that time. Still pretty decent. Thanks for tuning in. This is going to be Sidekick, signing off.